Point, Brooklyn, and is an editor at Soho Press. And you can find his work on www.greenzonekids.blogspot.com. Mark Doten.
Thanks a lot, Dale, for inviting me, and thanks also for hosting. It's great. Thanks everyone for coming, and it's great to read with Ned and Simon. And I am going to read two short bits from the novel I'm working on, which is an update of Inferno. As he said, the first piece is just the opening pages, gives you a little frame. The second piece is in the middle of one of the narratives told by one of the people in this sort of hell-like space, which isn't exactly hell. No one in there really knows that they're in hell, although they sort of briefly flicker into and out of it. You're not going to see that in the piece I'm reading. And I'm going to set up the second piece just a little before I start, so I don't have to interrupt, because it's part of a long story. It takes place, and here's the information you need to know. It takes place in an Obama fundraiser. The narrator is a paraplegic old man who's editor-in-chief and publisher at a major New York City publishing house. In spite of being a major donor and bundler for Obama, it's the first time they've met, and the entire 10,000-word story, which I'll be reading a little bit of, is a monologue the narrator delivers to Obama during the course of a single unbroken handshake. He is sort of terrified. There's two choirs singing on stage, an urban choir youth choir from Harlem and one from Oakland. And as soon as they're done, Obama's going to leave him and go out and give a talk. He's trying to get through a lot of information that he feels is important for Obama to know before that happens. And finally, his publishing house's publicity department is composed entirely of African-American men, a fact that he is quite proud of and mentions often. All right. Commission report on the Infernal. Commission statement. We present these documents. Yes, one day we will present them to the President, to Congress, to the American people, one imagines, though not yet, when they have been better understood. When a narrative has been created and the recommendations that would flow from such a narrative, then they will be presented. Overview. The Infernal is composed of 29 texts extracted by the apparatus of perfect confession from the Akkad Boy, along with 4 notes from the apparatus's operator, Lucent 28. These texts were produced over a 4-day period, terminating with the Akkad Valley disaster. Apart from the few pages that appear to be the unmediated words of the Akkad Boy, or rather his words as mediated only by the apparatus, the Infernal presents the stories of 16 politicians, media figures, military personnel, and civilians here and in the Middle East for whom the term sub-confessors has been adopted. Discovery of the Akkad Boy. A reeling shadow drew them to the child, to the boy, found naked and in convulsion atop a twisting geological formation known as El Maqtadla, the chimney, by those who once walked in its shadow until new technologies, telegraphy, light bulbs, diodes, and X-rays, brought first by happenstance, then strategy, revealed the Akkad Valley's strange properties, for it snuffed them all. And in the ensuing struggle to control an area dense with cosmic noise, a space that existed in abrogation of natural law, which is to say, pointing to laws higher or beyond, we and our adversaries drove off they that once lived here. The first shadow became 2, then 3, as the patrol, a World War II-era jeep, and several uniformed men on horses made their way toward that pillar of rough-hewn yellow stone. By the time they reached the base of the chimney, a dozen or more carrion birds spiraled overhead. The patrol then saw the blackened hand 10 meters up, saw it flung over the lip and jittering. Perhaps this was what we'd been waiting for, this impossible boy. There is no sphere of American concern to which this commission does not apply itself. But for over a century, since its remarkable properties came to light, we have held a special place for this valley in our hearts. The report on commission resource allocation demonstrates in starkest possible terms our unwavering attention to the scrap of desert which we believe could well make the difference in our global struggle, is even now making that difference. The scout. On the patrol was a man who knew from the informal contests sometimes staged there how to climb the chimney without aid of rope or ladder. He knew which handholds could be trusted and which couldn't, how to make it over the smooth bulge that ringed the formation halfway up, and steered clear of the southeast corner where attractive-looking declivities were inlaid with scorpion nests. Thus, he was the first to take in the whole figure. After first rejecting what he saw, he took it in. But he could not truly take it in, or could do so only for a moment before again rejecting it. And so he reached a compromise. He would understand the noises coming from the child, as well as the information of his visual and olfactory senses, scorched hair and flesh, for instance, intertwining, jockeying for primacy, but also he wouldn't. He would hold all that to one side. He would not process it. In the half-light of this compromise, he took steps to deliver himself from the vision, to interpose other bodies between himself and it. He shouted for a canteen and cast down a rope he anchored. He kicked at the carrion birds which had not yet begun to fill their stomachs with the flesh of the boy. From the top of the chimney, waving a red flag emblazoned with a rabbit, the scout signaled back to the base. The scout then touched him or her, or perhaps it. Let us allow for him, let us say him and boy, when the burns, including those between the legs, were of such severity that neither race nor gender was immediately apparent. He touched the little boy, this poor thing, as he later referred to him, not remembering where he touched the poor thing. He knew only that the flesh still burned in his own hand was on fire in the touching, lit somehow with a clear flame. The scout stumbled backward and did not understand it, that a living boy could be burning flesh, that he himself was burning and yet was still in motion, that his heels were now hung at the chimney's very lip. He did not understand that he was still moving, still stumbling back, and did not understand as it was happening the fall that snapped his spine. Later he would understand, but at that moment, no. He simply could not understand how it was that the faces of the men and horses had flown up to encircle him there, on top of the chimney, that the faces of men and horses could have flown up around him, that a boy could be a living thing and a burning thing, both at once, and that his own body was now the fact of its new immobility and the fact of a single pain, that he, the scout, was, the scout thought, burning, that his whole body was burning up, that in this burning up he was held immobile. In truth, it was only his hand that burned with a clear flame where he touched the boy. The pain and immobility, otherwise the pain and immobility of the fall that had snapped his spine. And this was, all of this, an outrage. The scout bared his teeth and howled at the outrage to the bodies, to the boys, and to his own through the boys, howled past or against the ring of human and equine faces, over and beyond the chimney, a sound that carried even 3 kilometers back to the base. The soldiers heard the scout's howl, and heard what he howled. What he howled was the fact of their burning, and as he howled, he knew they both must die. Both he and the poor thing must now, this very instant, surely die. And so he howled and set the huge birds reeling across the face of the near vertical sun. But in this, he was mistaken. The scout did not die at all. Atada, the chimney, nor did the boy. All right, this is the second piece. Fat, fretting literary agents, the ad guys at magazines, those stringy game hens. I put the screws to them as they've been putting the screws to me for years. The freelancers were softer, more desperate, and once the current roster was squeezed dry, I combed through the files. Imagine how tightly the wallet of a proofreader you've not given work since the mid-'80s would be shut against you. But you have seen the checks, so you cannot doubt my tenacity, the force of my will, when I know what it is I want. I had to keep giving. Why did I have to? Well, the only way to get through it is to get through it. What do I mean by that? See, I've just figured it out.
a minute ago, right now. I was giving to figure out why. I was giving. And unless I kept on, I'd never find out. The first check, $25. Let's start there. Let's start with why I started. It's like I said, you were a problem. A million years ago, in the 60s, I left my job at a textbook publisher in Dallas and opened shop here. I was through with textbooks. I didn't know what to do exactly, so I just picked something and I did it. And right away, I had the magic touch. Each series a bestseller, one after the next. They said, he's the guy with the magic touch. And I made that magic touch my whole life. Nothing else much mattered, except, for a time, Reagan. See, Reagan, my God. With Reagan, there was the Washington Hilton and what they did to him there. And I felt so bad. I thought we should have done something to keep it from happening. So I sent a few chats, almost by way of apology, and then a few more. Then a few years later, he was done. He'd served and he was out. Did I keep giving? People were calling me, sending me mail by the truckload, accosting me at industry functions that somehow found out about and talked their way into. No, not a penny. As if a spell had been cast on me, I once again simply forgot about politics, and I returned to the magic touch. But then, what? What was it? The moment came, the speech came, and suddenly you were a problem. You were my problem. I was joysticking from window to window. His wheelchair is a joystick. And then back to my desk in my corner office, the numbers from the recently failed debut clutch in my hand. At the desk, I'd hold down the intercom button and listen to what they were saying in publicity. It was a button I liked to press. Why deny it? I pressed the button and listened because of how it calms me, how it used to calm me. On the afternoon in question, they were saying they'd seen something all new. They asked each other, how often in your life do you get to see something all new? I didn't go online to see what they were talking about, not yet. I joystick back to the windows and looked down 30 floors to Bryant Park at all those people out there on their lunch hours or simply out. Tiny people you couldn't see worth a damn. Suit, t-shirt, man or woman, black or white, maybe that, maybe only that. In twos or threes, bunched and spilling at the intersections, it was dog walkers, dentists, line cooks, bums, who knows what they were. You imagine these things glancingly, and of course it doesn't matter. Not to them. The tiny people are moving, as they always have and will forever. As I've watched them for almost 5 decades, from the offices of my publishing house, thousands of tiny people coming and going in Bryant Park. Were the men who sit alone in wooden folding chairs, green wooden folding chairs, feeding themselves from their laps. Have you seen these men? Maybe one day I'll take you up to my office and show it to you. All my tiny people. The tiny people had spoken, you see. They'd been speaking all year and you could not mistake the words. Mercy, I surrender, no more books. No thank you. Enough with the abs and the gluten-free. Goodbye to the ins and outs of profiling your best rippers and rapists and stranglers. Sayonara to the deluxe outsized photo books of the Queen's little corgis. But until the recently failed debut, these words hadn't touched me. They'd been meant for someone else. You see, the tiny people had not abandoned books altogether. In every other subject category I cut to the bone, they said, but epic fantasy, never. There is my line in the sand, and what you may you add, and what you may ask is epic fantasy to me. Did I say it already? It's almost the whole of my list. That afternoon, I felt for the tiny people, both tenderness and disgust. Such disgust as I couldn't remember ever feeling. Waves of disgust washed through me like the ocean washes through the ribs of a sunken ship. As I sat there pressed to the glass and I wrote in my personal, I could have watched them for days. Could have died in my chair just watching. That's how much disgust I felt. But at last I reached through my disgust. I reached through to tenderness and held tight. I had tenderness in hand. In only one hand. In the other, it was still disgust. I held them both, then I released my hands, and both fell away from me. The lights of Bryant Park flared. The tiny people took no notice. And at last, I switched on my computer. There you were, on that stage in Philadelphia, before a Philadelphia podium. A more perfect union, 80, and the whole way through, you were so calm. Welcome back, adults. Welcome back, civilized discourse. That's what I said. Amen and amen and amen to all of that. This really and truly was the finest speech on race I had ever heard. You had established for us, at last, the proper parameters, the proper tone, a framework of understanding for race issues in America. What you said was, we will talk about it like this, but not like that. We will study it here, and not there. We will give questions of race, finally, their proper due. But no more. Do you remember what Kennedy said on TV? Race has no place in American life or law. But Kennedy was wrong. It has a place. Sure it does. You gave it its place and told it, stay. Stay in your place. Why didn't Kennedy think of that? If only Kennedy had thought of that. Oh God, they stopped. Oh no, they stopped. Listen. Wait. Is it the other one? I thought they had stopped for good. I thought that the Ray-Bans were about to take you out the door. But listen, these urban choirs, Harlem, Oakland, I can't hear the difference. Can you hear it? Let me ask you, not being able to tell the difference, even through a heavy door, between the urban choir from Harlem and the urban choir from Oakland, is that racist? Serious question, I really do want to know. You just look at the boys in publicity and tell me if I'm racist. Here's the thing, we're no longer judged on our actions. It's all based on checklists people carry around. When I say, we don't have a book in Japan or Africa, for instance, you mark down a strike against me. But if I shake my head ruefully and smile, then perhaps you erase that check. The underlying fact has not changed. I still don't have one in Japan or Africa. Perhaps, then, that was never the point. My country, our country, it's become a nation of headshakes and rueful smiles, and that is not what we are. We can never be, and will never be, a nation like that. Something inside will start to build up. There will be a pressure that must be released. That's why you drive our opponents so crazy. The calm in you won't let them release any pressure. You know the term biofeedback? My point is, I'm not getting any. Your hand holds mine firm, steadily. This handshake does everything a conventional handshake should do. And where are those slight variations, those little signs that I'm getting through to you, that you are reacting in a positive or negative manner to my words? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to squeeze like that. Did you feel my heart in it? You're lucky it wasn't Daddy. When he shook my hand, there was the sliding and snapping. He squeezed so tight, you felt it in the webbing between the thumb and index finger. He braced himself, locked his elbow at 90 degrees, then squeezed. He was not even looking you in the eye, somewhere above and behind the eye. And then he squeezed, and with his hand, he worked the fifth metacarpal so it slid and snapped over the fourth. I feel it in any other bones. Sure, I felt it in every bone in my body. I'd say, Daddy, that hurts. And what would he say? What would he say? The only way to get through it is to get through it.
Thank you, Mark. Wait, first I'm supposed to do my professional duty, I always forget. So, as you know, these readings are sponsored by a little publishing company called Mischief and Mayhem, and the lovely Lisa Deerbeck is now walking around with a clipboard. You will, I'm told to be very directive here, you will put your name and your email down on it, and you will be spammed incessantly with emails from us until, of course, you click on subscribe, which we're required to put on there by law, and it will stop it and make it go away. But please do sign them. Also, if you go in the bag, we have some beautiful Mischief and Mayhem t-shirts for sale. They're a mere $10, very fashionable. And there's even a couple of copies of a new book called The Garden of Lost and Found that you might be able to buy if you don't listen to it. But that's just up to you. Okay, I'm done with the shilling. Our next reader is Ned Beauman, whose first novel, Boxer Beetle, was called a compelling debut by The Guardian, which went on to write, Beauman could perform the complicated paradoxical trick required of the best 21st century realistic novelist to take an old and predictable structure and allow it to produce new and unpredictable emotions. His second novel, The Teleportation Accident, will be published by Bloomsbury in 2013. Ned Beauman.
Hi, I was thinking about the theme of this reading series last week when I was at the Frieze Art Fair. And I was talking to this art writer who told me about an artist I'd never heard of called John Duncan, who's one of those very transgressive American performance artists in the 70s. And John Duncan in 1980 did a piece called Blind Date, in which he went to Mexico, paid a mortician to give him 15 minutes alone with a female corpse, and then recorded himself having sex with the corpse, which apparently sounded like rustling paper if you listen to the tape. And one of the reasons Duncan gave for producing this piece, if it's a piece, is he said that if he did it, then it would render it unnecessary for anyone after him to put themselves through that kind of self-torture as a creative act, which sort of implies that if he hadn't done it, all the rest of us would have really felt like an urgent need to do that, which I'm not sure about, but if true, then he really took a bullet for us, so we should be grateful. Anyway, I do quite like this idea that transgressive art in that way is about like kind of riding out into this like wild territory and kind of conquering it and mapping it and pacifying it, like in this Wild West way where, you know, you're like a strong, brutal person and so you do it so that the people in their corsets back home don't have to. I thought about that a lot, like because when my book originally came out, a lot of people in interviews and so on were talking about it being shocking and were asking me about why I'd written a shocking book, and then also this is the like tenuous way in which I'm trying to involve this again in the theme of the reading series. It did take a long time to sell it in the US because it seemed like US publishers were quite squeamish about some of the content. And I always found that really odd because you look at my book and then you look at something genuinely shocking. Like, for instance, The Story of the Eye by George Bataille was published in 1928, which is my great-grandparents' heyday. And that's way more shocking than anything in this book. So, like, not to mention all the things that have come since, like Ballard or Hubert Suffolk Jr. or Bret Easton Ellis. So I always wanted to say to these people, like, how can you call this book shocking? Have you not read Bataille or all the much worse things that came before me? But of course it turned out no, they hadn't. And I think sort of in the same way that one thing that we can learn from that blind date piece is we can learn something about art, which is that having sex with a corpse is shocking every time you do it. But having sex with a corpse as art is only shocking the first time. But the trouble is, when people aren't aware of the precedents, then trying to be transgressive becomes less about going out into this kind of external border territory of chaos, and more about a kind of topography of this inner domestic territory of just ignorance. So I don't, not to be too condescending, but in a way that the worse read your audience is, the easier it is to be transgressive, which is, I think, why certain authors, which we can all think of, find their most loyal readers among teenagers who haven't read very much. Anyway, so luckily, in order to not find my book shocking, I think the only precedents that you have to be aware of are just read a little bit about Anne Hollinghurst and then watch Inglourious Bastards. And then you couldn't possibly, I think, find anything shocking in here. Anyway, but I will let you judge for yourselves because I'm going to read a little bit from the opening of the book, which is called Box of Beetle, by the way. That's the cover. In idle moments, I sometimes like to close my eyes and imagine Joseph Goebbels' 43rd birthday party. I like to think that even in the busy autumn of 1940, Hitler might have found time to organise a surprise party for his close friends, pretending for weeks that the date had slipped his mind, deliberately ignoring the propaganda minister's increasingly sulky and awkward hints, and waiting until the very last order had been dispatched to his U-boat commanders on the evening of Tuesday the 29th of October, before he led Goebbels on some pretext into the cocktail lounge of the Reich Chancellery. A great shout of "Alles Gute zum Geburtstag!" A cascade of streamers, some relieved and perhaps even slightly tearful laughter from Goebbels himself as he embraced the Führer, and the party could begin. All this is conjecture, of course, but what is certain is that at some point on that day, Hitler presented Goebbels with his birthday present, an exquisite 15-volume illustrated edition of the complete works of Goethe, published in Stuttgart in 1881 by J.G. Gottafschen, bound in red Morocco leather with a gilded spine and marbled edges. One can't help feeling sorry for the soldiers of the 101st US Airborne Division who, nearly 5 years later, broke into a boarded-up salt mine near Berchtesgaden and splintered the schnapps crates piled inside to find not gold bullion, nor the Holy Spear of Destiny that pierced Christ's side, nor even a single consolatory bottle of schnapps, but instead Goebbels' personal library, stashed there in haste when the war began to turn against the Nazis. Nonetheless, somebody was dutiful enough to make sure the books escaped the bonfires, and they were shipped back to the Library of Congress in Washington. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Hitler's 16,000 books, along with his skull and Eva Brandt's underwear, were captured by the Red Army and to this day lie mouldering in an abandoned Baroque church on the Uzko estate near Moscow, which I can only assume is, by some distance, the spookiest building in the entire world. The book collection wouldn't even be unpacked until 1952, when the job was given to a college student on work experience who probably wished he was helping out at a summer camp. By then, the Gottafschen Goethe, with its fond inscription by Hitler and scattered marginalia by Goebbels, had escaped onto the open market. And some 50 years later, it passed into the hands of Horace Grublock, the London property developer who, until his violent death earlier this year, was an irregular employer of mine. That bit about the violent death is a literary technique that we in the business like to call foreshadowing. Between 2002 and 2007, Grublock gave me 3 volumes, from Prometheus through to Iphigenia of Taurus, in exchange for errands, promising that one day, if I were loyal, I would collect the whole set. It was humiliating, but Grublock said he'd never sell, and even if he did, the sort of dealers who could handle the Goebbels, Gutash and Goethe wouldn't have taken so much as a telephone call from the likes of me, Kevin Broom. And even if they would, I could never have afforded it, so I had no choice. That's why, one day in September, when Grublock called at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, back when I'd never even heard of the town of Rochemorton, foreshadowing, I ran for my phone with toothpaste still dribbling from my mouth, knowing it had to be him. "Fishy!" he said. "Yes, Horace? You remember that private investigator who's been doing a spot of work for me, Jojak?" "I think so." "He's supposed to check in every evening by telephone, but he's missed 2 nights now without any warning. I've tried to call him myself and there's no answer. Drive over and see if he's alright." "To his office?" "He doesn't have an office. He works out of his home like a suburban palm reader. It's in Camden. It'll only take 10 minutes. He gave me the address. "What's he doing for you?" "You know perfectly well I can't tell you, Fishy. As contingently loyal as you may be to me, I know your real allegiance is to your internet friends. Unless by any chance you've heard of a fellow called Seth Roach." "I haven't." "That's that then. Off you go." I am often asked the question, why would you become a collector of rare Nazi memorabilia unless you are yourself a secret Nazi? Or anyway, I expect I would often be asked that question if anyone knew about my hobby beyond Grublock, my former cleaning lady, Maria, and, as Grublock calls them, my internet friends. I'm not a secret Nazi. I feel sick when I think about what they did. So do you, probably. And if just the thought can provoke a spurious little shiver of survivor's guilt, imagine what it's like to pick up an SS dagger in your hand. I don't know of any experience like it. You feel as if you're doing something terribly wrong, and yet you know it can't be wrong because you're doing no harm to anyone. It's stupid and exhilarating and revelatory. Normally you can't get a proper look at your own conscience because it only ever comes out to gash you with its beak, and you just want to do whatever you can to push it away. But put your conscience in the cage of this paradox, where it can slither and bark but it can't hurt you, and you can study it for as long as you wish. Most people don't truly know how they feel about the Holocaust because they're worried that if they think about it too hard, they'll find out they don't feel sad enough about the 6 million dead. But I'm an expert in my own soul. Thanks.
Our final reader is going to be Simon Critchley. Before I introduce him, I'll just tell you, next month we have Jim and Karen Shepard reading here, is that correct? And then in July we have a reading of Long Island Noir with Akashic Books, which should be really exciting. In August, Chris Beha and Gabriel Brownstein will be reading here. I think in the fall we're looking at Catherine Davis, possibly Jaime Manrique. So make sure you check our website or our Facebook page or look for our emails to keep up what's going on here. So I'm going to introduce Simon, and when he's done, you are all free to get yourself another drink or buy some t-shirts or something like that, and we're coming up to say goodbye. So, Simon Critchley is the Hans Jonas Professor of Philosophy at the New School for Social Research. He has written for numerous publications, including a series in The Guardian concerning Heidegger's Being and Time. I just feel smart or stupid saying that, and moderates the New York Times opinion series The Stone. Critchley has published 14 books, the latest of which is The Faith of the Faithless. A 15th, The Hamlet Doctrine, is forthcoming. He also serves as Chief Philosopher of the International Necronautical Society, founded by novelist Tom McCarthy. He's going to be reading tonight from a piece called Philip K. Dick, or How to Become God, which will be published this Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday in the New York Times. So he's saving you from buying 3 newspapers.
Thank you. Philip K. Dick on How to Become God. 1. Meditations on a Radiant Fish. On February the 20th, 1974, Philip K. Dick was hit with the force of an extraordinary revelation after a visit to the dentist for an impacted wisdom tooth for which he had received a dose of sodium pentothal. A young woman delivered a bottle of Davron tablets to his apartment in Fullerton, California. She was wearing a necklace with a pendant of a golden fish, an ancient Christian symbol that had been adopted by the Jesus counterculture movement of the 1960s. The fish pendant, on Dick's account, began to emit a ray of golden light, and Dick suddenly experienced what he called, with a nod to Plato, an amnesis, the recollection or total recall of the entire sum of knowledge. Dick claimed to have access to what philosophers call intellectual intuition, the direct perception by the mind of a metaphysical reality behind the screens of appearance. Many philosophers since Kant have insisted that such intellectual intuition is only available to human beings in the guise of fraudulent obscurantism, usually as religious or mystical experience, like Emanuel Swedenborg's visions of the angelic multitude. This is what Kant called, in a lovely German word, die Schwärmerei, a kind of swarming enthusiasm where the self is literally enthused with the God. Brusquely sweeping aside the careful limitations and strictures that Kant placed on the different domains of pure and practical reason, the phenomenal and the noumenal, Dick claimed direct intuition of the ultimate nature of what he called true reality. Yet the golden fish episode was just the beginning. In the following days and weeks, Dick experienced and indeed enjoyed a couple of night-long psychedelic visions with phantasmagoric visual light shows. These hypnagogic episodes continued off and on, together with hearing voices and prophetic dreams, until his death 8 years later at the age of 53 and 52. Many very weird things happened, too many to list here, including a clay pot that Dick called Ho-On, or Oh-Ho, which spoke to him about various deep spiritual issues in a brash and irritable voice. Now, was this just bad acid or good sodium pentothal? Was Dick seriously bonkers? Was he psychotic? Was he schizophrenic? He writes, the schizophrenic is a leap ahead that failed. Were the visions simply the effect of a series of brain seizures that some called TLE, temporal lobe epilepsy? Could we now explain Dick's revelatory experience by some better neuroscientific story about the brain? Fuck the brain. The fact is that after Dick experienced the events of what he came to call 2374, the events of February and March of that year, he devoted the rest of his life trying to understand what had happened to him. For Dick, understanding meant writing. Suffering from what we might call chronic hypergraphia, between 2374 and his death, Dick produced more than 8,000 pages about this experience. He often wrote all night, producing 20 single-spaced narrow-margined pages at a go, largely handwritten and listed with extraordinary diagrams and cryptic sketches. The unfinished mountain of paper, Unprintable, most of it hasn't been printed, assembled posthumously into some 91 folders, was called Exegesis. The fragments were assembled by Dick's friend Paul Williams and then sat in his garage in Glen Ellen, California for the next several years. A beautifully edited selection of these texts with the golden fish on the cover was published only at the end of 2011, weighing in at a mighty 950 pages, but this is still a fraction of the unprinted and maybe unprintable whole. Dick writes, my exegesis then is an attempt to understand my own understanding. The book is the most extraordinary and extended act of self-interpretation, a seemingly endless thinking on the event of 2374 that always seems to begin anew, often dull, repetitive, and given to bouts of massive paranoia. Exegesis also possesses many passages of genuine brilliance and is marked by an utterly disarming sincerity. At times, Dick falls into a melancholic rejection and despair, but at other moments, like some latter-day Simon Magus, he is possessed of a manic swelling up of the ego to unify with the divine. I was in the mind of God. 2. Future Gnostic. What's the nature of the true reality that Dick claims to have intuited during these psychedelic visions of 2374? Does it unwind into mere structureless raving and ranting, or does it suggest some tradition of thought and belief? Maybe the latter, but this is where things get a little weirder in an already weird universe, so hold on tight. The core of Dick's vision is Gnostical. It's the mystical intellection at the highest moments of fusion with a transmundane or alien God who is identified with Logos, and who can communicate with human beings in the form of a ray of light, or in Dick's case, hallucinatory visions. There's a tension throughout exegesis between a monistic view of the universe and a dualistic or gnostical view of the cosmos, with two forces in conflict, one malevolent, the other benevolent. In my view, the dualistic view wins out. This means that the visible phenomenal world is fallen, indeed a kind of prison cell, cage or cave. Christianity, lest it be forgotten, is a metaphysical monism, where it is the obligation of every Christian to love every aspect of creation, even the foulest and the smelliest, because it is the work of God. Evil is nothing, and nothing substantial, because if it were, it would have been caused by God, who is by definition good. Against this, Gnosticism declares a radical dualism between the false God who created the world, sometimes usually called the demiurge, and the true God who is unknown and alien to this world. But for the Gnostic, evil is substantial, and evil's evidence is the world. There's the story of a radical Gnostic who used to wash himself in his own saliva in order to avoid having any contact, or little contact as possible, with creation. Gnosticism is the worship of an alien God by those alienated from the world. The novelty of Dick's Gnosticism is that the divine will is alleged to communicate with us through information. This is a persistent theme in Dick, and he refers to the universe as information, and even Christ as information. Such information has a kind of electrostatic life connected to a theory of what he calls orthogonal time. Orthogonal time is a rich and strange idea that's completely at odds with the standard linear conception of time, a series of now points extending from the future through the present and into the past. Dick explains orthogonal time as a circle that contains everything rather than a line, both of whose ends disappear into infinity. In an arresting image, Dick claims that orthogonal time contains, I quote, everything which was, just as grooves on an LP contain that part of the music which has already been played. They don't disappear after the stylus tracks them. It's like that seemingly endless final chord in the Beatles' A Day in the Life that gathers more and more momentum and musical complexity as it decays. In other words, orthogonal time permits total recall. In his wilder moments, and to be honest they occur pretty often, Dick declares that orthogonal time will make it possible for the golden age to return, namely the time before the fall, prior to original sin. He also claims that in orthogonal time, the future falls back into and fulfills itself into the present. This is doubtless why Dick believed that his fiction was becoming truth, that the future was unfolding in his books. For example, if you think for a second about how the technologies of security in the contemporary world already seem to resemble the 2055 of Minority Report more and more each day, maybe Dick has a point. Maybe he was writing the future. Dick's exegesis is a powerful and poignant restatement of the Gnostical worldview. He writes, and one can find passages like this all over the book. He says, there is a secret within a secret. The empire is a secret, its existence and its power, that it rules, and secondly, the secret illegal Christians pitted against it. So the discovery of a secret illegal Christians instantly causes one to grasp that if they exist illegally, something evil that is stronger is in power, right here. This is a succinct and revealing statement of the politics of Dick's Gnosticism. And the logic here is close to forms of mystical heresy from the various Gnostic sects of the early Christian period, like the Valentinians or the Manichaeans, through to the Cathars and the much-feared heresy of the free spirit that some historians have claimed was like an invisible empire in Europe in the 13th and 14th centuries. The core of the heresy consists in the denial of original sin. Sin does not lie within us, but within the world, which is not the creation of the true God, but of a malevolent demiurge, whom St. Paul calls in one quasi-gnostical moment the God of this world. Therefore, we must see through the evil illusion of this world to the true world of the alien God. The phenomenal world is the creation of a bad God and governed over by those agents of the demiurge that the Gnostics called archons, the rulers or governors, those whom Dick ominously calls empire. Today, we might call them the major corporations. When we learn to identify the true worldly source of sin, the Gnostics instruct that we can then begin the process of unifying with the divine by divorcing ourselves from the phenomenal world. At the end of this process, we become divine ourselves and can throw off the rule of the evil empire that governs the world. The link between mystical experience and political insurgency is constantly suggested throughout exegesis. This is the idea that we're slaves to empire and the world is a prison from which we need to free ourselves, what the Gnostics call the puny cell of the Creator God. It's what Dick calls BIP, Black Iron Prison, which is opposed to the spiritual redemption of PTG, Palm Tree Garden. Note here the emphasis on secrecy. The first secret is that the world is governed by malevolent imperial or governmental elites that form together a kind of covert coven. The world itself is a college of corporations linked together by money and serving only the interests of their business leaders and shareholders. The second secret, the secret within the secret, belongs to those few who have swallowed the red pill and torn through the veil of Mayhem. 3. Adventures in the Dream Factory. Philip K. Dick's admittedly peculiar but passionately held worldview and the Gnosticism that it embodies does more than explain what some call the dystopian turn in science fiction from the 1960s onwards. It also gives us what has arguably become the dominant mode of understanding of fiction in our time, whether literary, mediatic, artistic or cinematic. This is the idea that reality is a pernicious illusion, a repressive and authoritarian matrix generated in a dream factory. We need to tear it down in order to see things aright and have access to the truth. And let's be honest, it's simply immensely pleasurable to give oneself over to the idea that one has torn aside the veil of illusion and seen the truth. I am one of the elect, one of the few in the know, in the gnosis. Dick's Gnosticism allows us to see in a new light what is existentially most toughest in the traditional teaching of Christianity. For a Christian, sin lies within us in the form of original sin. Once we embrace Gnosticism, then we can declare that wickedness does not have its source within the human heart, but out there, within the corrupt archons of corporate capitalism or whoever. We are not wicked, it is the world that is wicked. This is an insight that finds its modern voice in Rousseau before influencing a whole Heinz variety of romanticisms which turn on the idea of natural human goodness, of childhood innocence. We adults idealize children because grown-up life is obviously such a disaster. Of course, we forget that being a child often really sucks. On the Gnostical view, once we see the wicked world for what it is, we can step back and rediscover our essential goodness, the divine spark within us, our purity, our authenticity. It's this very desire for purity and authenticity that drives the whole wretched industry of New Age obscurantism with its multiple techniques of spiritual and material detox, its quasi-cultic multi-million-dollar grossing insistence on the secret. Against this toxic view of the world, I think we need to emphasize the splendidly impure and inauthentic creatures that we are, but maybe that's just me. Aside from the Matrix trilogy and direct movie adaptations of Dick's fiction, and they are plentiful, from Blade Runner to Adjustment Bureau, there are strong Gnostical themes in, for example, 2 of the more recent movies of Lars von Trier. In Antichrist, the character played by Charlotte Gainsbourg says interestingly, nature is Satan's church. In Melancholia, the Kirsten Dunst character says to Charlotte Gainsbourg, all I know is that life on earth is evil. What is Gnostical, what is not Gnostical in von Trier is the supplementary insistence that if life is evil, then there is no life elsewhere. This is the reason why we should welcome the collision of the rogue planet Melancholia with Earth. But the pure rest version of Gnostical ideology, the Gnostical ideology of authenticity, is found in the biggest grossing movie of all time in America, James Cameron's 2009 Avatar. By 2148, Earth's resources have been used up and nature reduced to a filthy, poisoned husk. The corrupt and all-powerful RDA Corporation is mining for the appropriately named unobtainium on the planet Pandora. This is the home to the Na'vi, the beautiful, blue-skinned, 10-foot-tall beings who have an intimate connection with nature and who worship the mother goddess Aiwa. Jake, the broken, disabled ex-Marine eventually becomes his alien Navi avatar, melds with his true love Neytiri, and unifies with nature after defeating the satanic human forces of corporate evil. He loses his human identity and becomes the alien, leaving behind him the dreadful homeland of Earth for the blessed alien land. The point is that authentic harmony with nature can only be achieved by throwing off the garment of earthly nature and becoming human. Such is the basic fantasy of Gnosticism. Dick's Gnosticism also enables us to understand something of the paranoid style of American politics, and not just American politics. For example, Dick constantly comes back, early 70s, to the theme of Watergate, and the rather odd idea that the removal of President Nixon is the reassertion of the true deity over the false idols of the cave. Namely, that the phenomenal world is a prison governed by corrupt, secretive, and malevolent elites. If you think the modern version of that would be Goldman Sachs, if you think that there is a secret that can be known that they are hiding from us, and which requires the formation of a small secret sect to work against them, then you've entered into an essentially Gnostical logic. Politics here becomes a defense of purity against impure, inauthentic forces, and the true leader has to be an authentic hero who can combat the forces of evil with an almost superhuman resolve. Mitt Romney, step this way. I was reading the Book of Mormon at the weekend in a hotel room. If you haven't read it, please read it with what I've seen, what I've said, I think pertains to it in a certain way. Last point. The morality of Gnosticism is also oddly relevant to our current situation. Possessors of Gnosis set themselves apart from the great soiled mass of humankind. The hatred of the world was also a contempt for worldly morality. And this leads to two equal but opposed responses: asceticism and libertinage. Asceticism and libertinage. The ascetic infers from the access to gnosis that the world is a toxic, contaminating machine with which one should have as little contact as possible. This is arguably consistent with the whole contemporary culture and cult of detox, which insists on purifying the body and soul against environmental, nutritional, and sexual contact in order to find and safeguard some divine spark within. The awful truth of contemporary asceticism is powerfully played out in another film, Todd Haynes' brilliant Safe from 1995, in which the character played by Julianne Moore develops a total allergy to life. What is termed environmental illness leads her eventually into a self-help cult in the California desert, living alone in a hypoallergenic pod, muttering to herself in a mirror, "I love myself. I love myself." The flip side of the ascetic is the libertine. That is the person whose access to gnosis implies both absolute freedom and absolute protection. One thinks of the do what thou wilt hermetic charlatanism of Aleister Crowley, but one also thinks, and I've heard this story on countless occasions, often late at night, of the New York urban myth of the hugely wealthy finance guy who deliberately wanders drunk or stoned into oncoming traffic. He knows that he will be safe from harm because fate is on his side. He is therefore free to do whatever he wills. Once you have access to the secret, the forces of the universe align with your desires. In the face of an alienating and poisoning world, one can either withdraw to a safe allergic distance or plunge headlong into a viral whirlpool of humanity. Either way, I know I'll be okay. We love ourselves.